At the church funeral in Nairobi, the atmosphere was heavy with sorrow, but for Akyeng, the pain was even deeper. She had come to say her last goodbye to her father, but instead of being welcomed, her relatives turned against her. Some whispered that she was not a real daughter. Others openly mocked her, telling her to leave the church. Tears filled her eyes as she tried to hold her head high, but the rejection cut deep. With a broken heart, she stepped outside, feeling like she had lost both her father and her family in the same moment. Just then, a car pulled up, and the family lawyer stepped out, carrying a brown envelope. Everyone's attention turned to him as he walked straight into the church. He cleared his throat and said he had an announcement from the late father. The room grew silent as he opened the papers and began to read. To everyone's shock, the will clearly named Akyeng as the only rightful heir to her father's estate. The same people who mocked her just moments before stood frozen, their mouths open in disbelief. Tears rolled down Akyeng's cheeks again, but this time they were tears of victory. Her father had spoken for her, even in death. She was no longer the outcast they tried to make her. Instead, she was the one holding the legacy of her father. People who had pushed her away now struggled to hide their shame. The funeral that began with humiliation ended with Akyeng walking out with her head high, carrying both her father's love and his blessings. It was a moment of justice, and everyone present knew they had underestimated her strength. In a small village near Accra, the day of Efua's father's burial was supposed to be about mourning and honoring the man who had raised her with love and care. The villagers had gathered in large numbers, drums echoing softly in the background, and women wailing in sorrow. Efua, dressed in a simple black cloth, walked with a heavy heart, ready to lay her father to rest. But before she could even approach the graveside, her uncles blocked her path. Their voices rose sharply, accusing her of not being worthy, mocking her as if she was nothing more than a stranger in her own father's home. They told her to leave, claiming that as a daughter she had no right to be part of the burial ritual. The villagers gasped but said nothing, afraid of the powerful uncle. Efua's eyes filled with tears as she clutched her father's old handkerchief tightly. Every step she tried to take forward, they pushed her back, their jealousy and bitterness clear for everyone to see. "You are not the heir, you are only a girl," one uncle shouted, his words cutting like a knife. With her head bowed, Efua began to walk away, her heart breaking as she thought she had lost not only her father, but also her place in the family. Just then, the sound of a car pulling up broke the silence. The family lawyer stepped out, holding a large brown envelope. The murmurs grew louder as he walked straight to the front. "I was instructed by the late Kofi Mensah to read his final will at this very gathering," he announced. The crowd hushed instantly, and even the uncles shifted nervously, their faces stiff with worry. The lawyer carefully unfolded the papers and began to read aloud. His voice was steady as he declared that all of the farmland, the very heart of the family's wealth and pride, had been left solely to Efua, his beloved daughter. The crowd froze. The same uncles who had mocked her now stood pale and silent, unable to believe what they had just heard. Gasps and whispers spread through the villagers, many smiling secretly, happy to see justice served. Efua lifted her tear-stained face, her heart pounding as she realized her father had never forgotten her. He had trusted her above everyone else. As the lawyer finished reading, the villagers clapped and congratulated Efua, some even chanting her name with pride. "Your father has spoken through his will," an elder said, placing his hand gently on her shoulder. Efua's tears now turned into tears of joy. She walked back to the burial site, no longer with her head bowed, but with her shoulders straight and her spirit lifted. Her uncles, who had tried to push her out, now stood ashamed, unable to meet her eyes. Efua's strength and her father's love had silenced them all. That day, the burial became more than just a goodbye, it became a celebration of justice. Efua was not only her father's daughter, she was now the rightful owner of all his farmland, the true heir of his legacy. The whole village witnessed the moment her sorrow turned into victory, and many whispered that her father's blessing would guide her forever. In a small village near Accra, the day of Efua's father's burial was supposed to be about mourning and honoring the man who had raised her with love and care. The villagers had gathered in large numbers, drums echoing softly in the background, and women wailing in sorrow. Efua, dressed in a simple black cloth, walked with a heavy heart, ready to lay her father to rest. But before she could even approach the graveside, her uncles blocked her path. Their voices rose sharply, accusing her of not being worthy, mocking her as if she was nothing more than a stranger in her own father's home. They told her to leave, claiming that as a daughter she had no right to be part of the burial rituals. The villagers gasped but said nothing, afraid of the powerful uncles. Efua's eyes filled with tears as she clutched her father's old handkerchief tightly. Every step she tried to take forward, they pushed her back, their jealousy and bitterness clear for everyone to see. "You are not the heir, you are only a girl," one uncle shouted, his words cutting like a knife. With her head bowed, Efua began to walk away, her heart breaking as she thought she had lost not only her father, but also her place in the family. Just then, the sound of a car pulling up broke the silence. The family lawyer stepped out, holding a large brown envelope. The murmurs grew louder as he walked straight to the front. "I was instructed by the late Kofi Mensah to read his final will at this very gathering," he announced. The crowd hushed instantly, and even the uncles shifted nervously, their faces stiff with worry. The lawyer carefully unfolded the papers and began to read aloud. His voice was steady as he declared that all of the farmland, the very heart of the family's wealth and pride, had been left solely to Efua, his beloved daughter. The crowd froze. The same uncles who had mocked her now stood pale and silent, unable to believe what they had just heard. Gasps and whispers spread through the villagers, many smiling secretly, happy to see justice served. Efua lifted her tear-stained face, her heart pounding as she realized her father had never forgotten her work. He had trusted her above everyone else. As the lawyer finished reading, the villagers clapped and congratulated Efua, some even chanting her name with pride. "Your father has spoken through his will," an elder said, placing his hand gently on her shoulder. Efua's tears now turned into tears of joy. She walked back to the burial site, no longer with her head bowed, but with her shoulders straight and her spirit lifted. Her uncles, who had tried to push her out, now stood ashamed, unable to meet her eyes. Efua's strength and her father's love had silenced them all. That day, the burial became more than just a goodbye. It became a celebration of justice. Efua was not only her father's daughter, she was now the rightful owner of all his farmland, the true heir of his legacy. The whole village witnessed the moment her sorrow turned into victory, and many whispered that her father's blessing would guide her forever. At the city cemetery in Lagos, people gathered under the hot sun to bid farewell to a wealthy and respected man. Among the crowd was his daughter, Omotola, dressed in a simple black dress. She walked quietly, her heart heavy with grief, but instead of receiving sympathy, she faced cold stares and cruel whispers. Some relatives mocked her openly, calling her the poor one, saying she didn't belong among the others who came in fancy cars and expensive clothes. When she tried to sit with the family at the front, an aunt blocked her way and told her sharply, "This seat is not for you. You are nothing here." Omotola's eyes filled with tears, but she held them back, clutching her small handbag tightly. She had come to mourn her father, not to fight, yet every word thrown at her cut her like a knife. Some laughed quietly, enjoying her humiliation. "Look at her dress," one cousin whispered loudly. She came to a rich man's funeral looking like a beggar. Omotola lowered her head, embarrassed and heartbroken. She stood at the back, feeling invisible and unwanted, her grief now doubled with shame. Just as the coffin was being lowered, a black car stopped at the cemetery gates. A well-dressed man stepped out, carrying a leather file in his hand. It was the family lawyer. His presence immediately caught everyone's attention, and whispers spread through the crowd. He walked with authority toward the family and greeted them politely before announcing, "I was instructed by the late Chief Adewale to read his will here, in front of all witnesses." The noisy crowd went silent instantly, every eye fixed on him. The lawyer opened the file and began to read. His words were clear and firm. The entire multi-million naira company, the heart of Chief Adewale's wealth, was left to Omotola, his daughter. Not the uncles, not the cousins, not even the brothers, but the one they mocked as poor. The air grew heavy. Gasps and shocked murmurs spread. Faces that had moments ago been full of arrogance now turned pale. The aunt who had denied Omotola a seat slowly covered her mouth in shame. Omotola stood frozen at the back, her heart racing. She could hardly believe what she was hearing. Her father, who they said had forgotten her, had in truth remembered her more than anyone else. Tears rolled down her cheeks, but this time they were tears of joy and vindication. Villagers and guests began to look at her differently. Some clapped softly. Others came forward to congratulate her, saying, "Your father truly loved you." The lawyer closed the file and declared firmly, "This company now belongs to Omotola Adewale." That was the chief's final wish. A respectful silence followed, broken only by whispers of admiration. Omotola, once humiliated, now stood as the true heir to her father's empire. She walked slowly to the front, no longer trembling, no longer ashamed. This time no one dared to stop her. She stood proudly near her father's grave, honoring him with silent prayers, her head held high. The same people who had mocked her could not even lift their eyes to meet her. That day, the funeral turned into a lesson for all. Omotola, the daughter they called poor, walked away not only with her father's blessings, but with his entire legacy. It was a moment of justice, and everyone who witnessed it would never forget how silence fell the moment truth was revealed. By the riverside in Mombasa, the sound of waves mixed with the quiet cries of mourners as the funeral of a respected man took place. His daughter, Halima, walked slowly to the ceremony, her eyes red with tears. She had come to say her last goodbye to her father, the man who had been her protector and guide. But instead of being welcomed, she was met with bitterness. Her stepbrothers stood in front of her, blocking her path. "You don't belong here," one of them spat angrily. "Leave this place. You have no right to stand with us." The words stung her heart. Halima tried to speak, but the stepbrothers raised their voices, mocking her in front of the entire crowd. "She thinks she is important," one sneered. "But she is nothing." The mourners exchanged uneasy glances, but no one dared to challenge the brothers. Halima's tears flowed freely as she turned away, her chest heavy with grief. She felt as though she had lost her father twice, once in death, and now again in being rejected by the family. Just as she stepped aside, a sleek car arrived by the riverside. The door opened, and the family lawyer walked out, holding a folder close to his chest. The crowd shifted, whispers running through the mourners. He greeted everyone respectfully before raising his voice. "Before we end this ceremony, I have been instructed by the late Mr. Hassan to read his will in the presence of his family and community." The riverbank grew silent. Even the waves seemed to quiet down. The lawyer opened the folder carefully, his words firm and steady as he read. "I, Hassan, leave my seaside property, my most valuable estate, to my beloved daughter Halima." For a moment, the world seemed to stop. Gasps echoed through the crowd, and all eyes turned toward Halima. The very stepbrothers who had mocked her now stood frozen, their faces pale and their mouths open in shock. Halima covered her mouth with trembling hands, tears rolling down her cheeks again, this time not from pain, but from relief and love. Her father had spoken for her, even from the grave. He had trusted her more than anyone else, leaving her the home by the sea that was the pride of the family. Some elders stepped forward, nodding in approval. "Your father knew your worth," one of them said warmly. "Congratulations, Halima. He has honored you greatly." The lawyer closed the folder and added, "This was his clear and final wish. No one can take it from her." The crowd erupted with murmurs of admiration, and many came closer to shake Halima's hand, whispering blessings and congratulations. The humiliation she had suffered only moments ago was now replaced with respect and admiration. Her stepbrothers could no longer meet her eyes. Their arrogance melted into shame, and they stood silently as Halima walked back to the riverside with her head held high. She stood near her father's coffin, whispering her final prayer, her heart now filled with strength. That day, the riverside burial became more than just a farewell. It became a story of justice, love, and truth. Halima, the daughter they tried to push away, left as the true heir to her father's seaside property. The waves of the ocean seemed to rise with pride, carrying her father's blessing as she walked forward, no longer broken, but victorious. In Kampala, the ancestral compound was crowded with relatives, neighbors, and elders who had gathered to mourn the passing of a respected man. The compound was full of traditional drums, the smell of food cooking, and the sound of people crying. Among the mourners was Nabari, his daughter, dressed in a very simple dress. She had no gold jewelry, no expensive shoes, and no flashy headscarf like her cousin. As soon as she entered, whispers began to spread. Some cousins pointed at her clothes and laughed. Others shook their heads, calling her the poor one. When she tried to step into the compound, an ant blocked her way and said cruelly, "Stay outside. You will embarrass us. Look at what you are wearing. This is not how a daughter of this family should appear." Laughter followed, and Nabari's heart sank. She felt humiliated in front of everyone. She held back her tears, quietly standing outside near the gate, listening to the songs of mourning and feeling left out of her own father's farewell. As the funeral continued, the family lawyer arrived, dressed neatly and holding a folder. His presence immediately silenced the noise of gossip. Everyone knew he carried important words from the late man. He walked to the front where the elders sat and cleared his throat. "I have been instructed to read the will of the late Mr. Samanda," he said firmly. The compound fell silent. Even the children stopped playing. The lawyer opened the folder and began reading aloud. "I, Samanda, declare that the entire ancestral land, every field, every home, every piece of property in this compound, belongs to my daughter Nabari." For a moment, the compound froze. The laughter stopped, the mocking whispers vanished, and all eyes turned to Nabari, who was still standing at the gate. Gasps filled the air, followed by shocked silence. Nabari covered her mouth with her hands, tears rushing down her cheeks. She could not believe what she had just heard. The same people who had told her to stay outside now stared at her with shame on their faces. Some of the elders rose to their feet, nodding in respect. One old man walked toward her and said gently, "Your father has spoken with his heart. He has honored you. Congratulations, Nabari. You are the true keeper of this land." The lawyer closed the folder and repeated firmly, "This was his final wish. No one can change it." The crowd murmured in agreement. Some women clapped softly. Others came forward to hug Nabari, praising her father for recognizing her true value. Slowly, Nabari walked into the compound, her steps steady, her head held high. This time, no one dared to stop her. Instead of laughter, she was met with respectful silence. She stood beside her father's coffin, whispering a prayer of thanks, her heart full of love and pride. That day, the funeral became more than just a mourning ceremony. It became a moment of justice and victory. Nabari, the girl they mocked for her simple clothes, walked away as the rightful heir of the entire ancestral land. The compound that once rejected her now belonged to her, and everyone knew her father's blessing would guide her forever. At a large graveyard in Lusaka, people gathered around a freshly dug grave. The sky was gray, heavy with rain threatening to fall any moment. Mwyla stood just outside the crowd, dressed in simple clothes, her shoulders hunched. She had come to bury her father, but instead of comfort she was met with cold looks and sneers. Her cousins shouted at her in public. "You don't belong here," hissed. "You are not of value," another said. Her father's businesses, shops, a fleet of trucks, some land, were being spoken of, but never for her. She felt tears mix with dust as she stood there, hurt and isolated. Her heart beat fast. She tried to walk forward to the front, to stand with the others, but an uncle blocked her path. He raised his voice above the whispers. "Step aside, Mwyla. These things are not for you." The shame cut deep. She turned away, swallowed by grief and shock, feeling unseen and unworthy. Then a figure approached through the crowd, the family lawyer, carrying a thick file. The murmurs paused. Rain began to fall, gentle at first, then harder, as if nature itself held its breath. The lawyer's voice rang out above the crowd. "Before we continue, I have instructions from the late father." Everyone stopped. Even the mocking cousins turned to face him. He opened the file, carefully unfolding several pages. The rain blurred his face slightly, but his voice was strong. "I, your father, leave all my businesses, the shops, the trucks, the lands, in sole control to my daughter Mwyla." A gasp swept through the crowd like wind through trees. The people who moments ago claimed she didn't belong were now frozen. Faces that had sneered were now silent. Mwyla's knees felt weak. Tears streamed down her face. Not from pain now, but from shock and relief. Her father had seen her, loved her, believed in her. Her soul lifted. Some of the elders nodded. Some women came forward, placing hands on her shoulder. "He did you right," one man whispered. "You deserved this." The lawyer closed the file. "This is his final will. It cannot be challenged," he said. The rain let up. A soft hush lingered as the crowd seemed to hold its breath. Then a warm murmur rose. Words of respect, tears, congratulations. A distant uncle mouthed, "I see now," unable to meet her eyes. Mwyla stood, soaked but standing, her head high. She walked gently toward the business premises her father built, toward the legacy he left her. In that moment, the graveyard echoed not just with loss, but with justice, love, and triumph. Mwyla, once cast aside, now carried her father's dream. The townspeople would long remember the day truth won, the day a daughter reclaimed her place, not by asking, but by inheriting all that was rightfully. Congratulations, Mwyla. You have inherited not just property, but dignity. In a quiet mountain village near Addis Ababa, people gathered to bury a respected elder. The air was cool, and the hills around echoed with the sounds of morning song. Among the mourners stood Mekts, his youngest daughter, dressed simply, her eyes full of tears. She had always been the quiet one, never raising her voice, never demanding anything. But instead of showing her kindness, some relatives mocked her. "Why are you even here?" one cousin said loudly. "You are just the quiet daughter. You have no place in this." When she tried to walk closer to the grave, two uncles stepped in front of her, blocking her way. "Stay back, Mekts," they said harshly. "This is not for you. You are too weak, too silent to carry our father's legacy." Their words cut deep. Mekts lowered her head, her heart breaking. She felt invisible, pushed aside even at her own father's farewell. The villagers looked on quietly, some pitying her, others too afraid to speak against the uncles. Just as the prayers were ending, a man appeared at the edge of the crowd. It was the family lawyer, holding a folder under his arm. His presence immediately caught everyone's attention. He greeted the elders respectfully, then raised his voice so all could hear. "Before this burial ends, I must read the will of the late Tesfaye," he said. The crowd hushed instantly, curious to hear what the respected elder had left behind. The lawyer opened the folder and began to read clearly. "I, Tesfaye, declare that the lands of this village, the fields, the mountainsides, and the farmland, are to be entrusted fully to my daughter, Mek. She is the trustee and guardian of all our land." Gasps spread through the crowd. The same uncles who had mocked her froze in shock, their faces pale. Villagers turned to look at Mekts, whispering in disbelief and admiration. Mekts's eyes widened, her breath catching in her chest. Tears streamed down her cheeks, but this time they were not tears of shame. they were tears of relief and honor. Her father had trusted her, the daughter they called too quiet, to carry the weight of the family's most precious inheritance. The villagers began nodding, some clapping softly, others stepping forward to congratulate. "Your father knew your strength," one elder said gently. "You are blessed, Mex. He has chosen you for this duty." The lawyer closed the folder and said firmly, "This is his final and binding wish. No one can take it away from her." The crowd murmured in agreement, and the uncles who had pushed her away lowered their heads in shame, unable to say a word. Slowly, Mex walked to the front, her steps steady, her shoulders straight. This time no one stopped her. Instead, they parted to let her pass, honoring her place. She stood by her father's grave, whispering a final prayer, her heart full of gratitude and love. That day, the mountain village witnessed more than a burial. They saw justice. They saw the quiet daughter rise in strength. Mex, once pushed aside, now walked as the rightful trustee of the village land. The hills seemed to echo with her father's blessing, carrying her name with pride. The funeral ended not with shame, but with celebration of her victory and the beginning of her new role as guardian of her father's legacy. In Kigali, the palace grounds were filled with people dressed in fine clothes, drums beating softly, and mourners gathered for a royal-style funeral. It was a grand ceremony, meant to honor a man of high respect and wealth. Among the crowd was Keza, his daughter, who had come quietly, dressed in a simple black dress. But instead of being welcomed, she was met with laughter and cruel words. Some of her relatives pointed at her and mocked her, whispering that she did not belong. One aunt even told her loudly, "Leave this place. These palace grounds are not for someone like you." The words stung deeply. Keza's eyes burned with tears, but she stood still, trying to hide her pain. She wanted only to say goodbye to her father, yet she was being treated like a stranger in her own home. The crowd shifted awkwardly, some shaking their heads in pity, others keeping silent, afraid to speak against the powerful relative. Keza lowered her gaze, her heart heavy with grief and humiliation. As the ceremony continued, a man in a dark suit walked into the grounds carrying a leather folder. It was the family lawyer. His presence immediately drew silence from the crowd. With a calm but strong voice, he greeted the elders and said, "Before this funeral ends, I have been instructed by the late Chief Mugisha to read his final will here, before all of you." The palace grounds grew quiet, every eye fixed on him. He carefully opened the folder and unfolded the papers. His voice carried through the air as he read aloud. "I, Chief Mugisha, declare that the palace grounds, the pride of our family and our history, are to belong to my daughter Keza." For a moment, time seemed to stop. Gasps and whispers filled the crowd. The same people who had mocked her now stood frozen, unable to believe what they had just heard. Keza's heart pounded. Her hands trembled as tears rolled down her face again, but these were tears of joy and relief. Her father had not forgotten her. Even in death, he had spoken for her, giving her the honor no one could take away. Some elders nodded with approval, and a few villagers clapped softly. One elder walked toward her and said warmly, "Your father has honored you. Congratulations, Keza. This land is yours." The lawyer closed the folder and announced firmly, "This is his final will, and it cannot be changed." The relatives who had mocked her earlier now bowed their heads in shame. No one dared to speak against her anymore. The crowd began to surround Keza, congratulating her, blessing her, and praising her father for his wisdom. Slowly, Keza walked forward to stand by her father's coffin. This time no one stopped her. Instead, the people moved aside with respect. She placed her hand gently on the coffin, whispering a final prayer, her tears falling softly onto the wood. That day, the palace grounds witnessed more than a funeral. They witnessed justice, truth, and the victory of a daughter who was once rejected. Keza, mocked and told to leave, became the rightful owner of the very palace they tried to deny her. The funeral ended not in shame, but in celebration of her strength and her father's eternal love. In Johannesburg, the family hall was full of people gathered to mourn a wealthy and respected man. The atmosphere was heavy, with candles burning and relatives dressed in black. Among them was Naledi, his daughter, sitting quietly at the edge of the hall. She had come with a heart full of grief, but instead of being welcomed, she was met with cruelty. One of her brothers looked at her with scorn and whispered loudly, "She is unwanted here." Another added, "Father never meant for you to have anything." Their words spread through the room, and some cousins laughed openly, making Naledi's pain even deeper. She lowered her eyes, tears burning but refusing to fall. All she wanted was to honor her father, but now she felt small and invisible. Every insult echoed in her mind. When she tried to move closer to the front, her brothers shook their heads and waved her back. "This space is not for you," they said harshly. Naledi stayed silent, clutching her hands together, her heart aching as though she had lost her father twice, first in death and now in the rejection of her family. Just then, the doors of the hall opened, and a man in a neat suit walked in, holding a briefcase. It was the family lawyer. The noise in the hall faded as everyone turned to look at him. He greeted the elders respectfully, then cleared his throat. "Before we close this gathering, I have been instructed by the late Mr. Dlamini to read his will in front of the family," he said firmly. The room grew still. Even Nalady's mocking brothers leaned forward, expecting to hear their names. The lawyer opened his briefcase and pulled out official documents. His voice was steady as he began to read. "I, Mr. Dlamini, leave the family mansion and its keys not to my sons, but to my beloved daughter now." The hall erupted in gasps. Silence quickly followed, heavy and sharp. The same brothers who had called her unwanted now sat frozen, their faces pale, unable to believe what they had just heard. Guests began whispering, some even smiling, happy to see the truth revealed. All eyes turned toward Nalady, who was trembling in her seat. Her lips parted in shock, and tears rolled freely down her cheeks. This time, tears of relief and victory. Her father had not only remembered her, but he had given her the greatest treasure of all, the family mansion, the symbol of power and pride. One of the elders rose and said gently, "Your father has spoken. He has honored you. Congratulations, Nalady. You are the rightful keeper of this home." The lawyer closed the file and said clearly, this was his final wish. No one can take it away. The hall nodded in agreement. Relatives came forward, some hugging her, others blessing her with warm words. Nalady stood slowly, her head high, her spirit no longer broken. She walked forward with steady steps, and this time no one stopped her. The lawyer handed her the keys to the mansion, and the entire hall watched as she held them tightly, her father's love shining through them. That day, the funeral gathering became more than mourning, it became justice. Nalady, once mocked as unwanted, became the rightful heir of the family mansion. The insults turned into silence, and silence turned into respect. She left the hall not in tears of sorrow, but in tears of triumph, carrying her father's blessing and her new beginning.